this trade keeps going on, both eastward and westward. And at some point around about the 1st century AD, there is a greater understanding of the monsoon wind. So what happens as a result of this is that voyages become much more systematized. You don't have to go along the coastline and spend so much time. You can just cross. And so then the kind of trade happens completely changes. So you have, for example, from the Kerala coast, you can go directly to Socotra and then up the Red Sea and trade with the Romans and Greeks and the Mediterranean world in general. And on the east side, you can directly cross the Bay of Bengal and go across to Indonesia, Bali, and Malaysia, and so on. And so you see this explosion of maritime trade, which goes on for the next 1,000 years odd. And of course, there is the well-known story of how, empires like the Cholas, had the naval capability of even enforcing their writ in Southeast Asia militarily if they wanted to do. But it's important to remember through all of this that what we are dealing with is not, individual merchants on single ships going out and heroically trading. That may have been true in the beginning, in the Kaurinda period, which is, 3rd, 4th, 5th century BC, wherever you think the dating is. But certainly by the 10th century AD or 11th century AD, you are dealing actually with large fleets owned by merchant guilds. These merchant guilds are not small-scale operations. They have names like the 500. So obviously, 500 shareholders of this merchant guild, and they were basically multinational corporations. They had their own ships, they had their own navies and armies, and many of them were feared by the kings of their time. So they would survive many dynasties. Or dynasties would come and go, but these corporations would work through the Pallavas, to the Cholas, and so on. So they had a life of their own. And interestingly, all these great voyages were being funded by financiers. Guess who they were? They were the temple banks. So that's why there was such a lot of gold in the temples. Why? Because these banks were basically the banks and the private equity. They were basically providing equity. And you have these copper plate contracts, even today in some of these South Indian temples that have survived, which talk about the contracts between the merchant guilds and the temple banks. In fact, you also have tripartite contracts between the merchant guilds who would do the trading, the artisan guilds who produces the cloth, and the financing private equity guys, which are the temples. And so all of this gold was there, and this was it was a serious machine.